Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of Commune with Dungeon Master, presented by ICF. Regardless, I'm Thomas, the Dungeon Master for iCast Fireball, and I'm joined by
Ned, the player in iCast Fireball.
Thanks for joining us on this bonus episode that we've got. This episode we're hoping to be a little bit longer since it's after season 1 and we've got a lot to talk about DM-wise. We don't quite have our Word of Recall episode up now, but we are going to be answering a few fan questions regarding dungeon mastering and how it related or specific moments to season 1. So we're going to dive into it, and it's going to be fun. We've been looking forward to talking about this for quite some time.
Yeah, we received quite a few questions specifically asking Thomas about, how did the campaign that we heard in iCast Fireball differ from the campaign that was written in Tyranny of Dragons? So we're going to highlight some examples of that as part of a broader question of what we have taken to calling reactive DMing. How do you customize an adventure for your characters based off of their wants and their motivations?
There's a lot to unpack and a lot that can be talked about here, and quite frankly has been talked about at length with a lot of other popular podcasts and YouTubers. So I don't know if we'll be really sharing anything revolutionary to tabletop RPGs. All that we're going to be sharing is stuff that Ned and I have discovered in our journey as dungeon masters, podcasters, things of that nature. So if you are an avid listener to a bunch of D&D DMs to try to hone your craft, maybe you'll hear something new, but maybe you'll hear a lot of the same thing. And you know what? Maybe that's a good confirmation that you're on the right path, or that you're on your way to discover how you should DM.
Yeah. And hopefully you've listened to, we should probably say spoiler alert for our Tyranny of Dragons campaign.
Oh, yeah.
But hopefully if you've listened all the way through that, this will give you kind of a hands-on, you can see sort of moment by moment the ways in which Thomas adjusted this campaign so you can have some real-life examples.
Yeah. Good point there. Spoilers abounding. We will be heavily referring to Tyranny of Dragons, Season 1 of ICF, and probably maybe even a few other moments in other published adventures from Wizards of the Coast. But if you're a DM, you're going to be learning those or already know most of these moments anyway. So let's jump in. Let's dive right into this now that we've got all of our precursors, warnings, and spoiler tags out of the way.
So kind of the thought to lay the foundation for this entire conversation is Thomas and I both really like running pre-written adventures. I know that there's kind of a stigma out there of, if you're not homebrewing your own adventures, then you're not being a real DM. You're just taking somebody else's idea and running with it, which, I don't know, I really love running pre-written adventures. Matt Colville, he's got a great channel about how to DM. He talks as well about, he has this great comment about how if you ever read an adventure that you have been a player in, suddenly you see all the ways in which your dungeon master made it good.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work that goes into taking a pre-written adventure, in some ways even more work in taking a pre-written adventure and making it fit your characters.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll just preface this. That was a big hurdle for me to actually DM for a long time, is feeling like I had to create my own world and my own adventure, because that's what I had friends in high school do. They're like, I don't do pre-generated stuff, I just do my own stuff. Well, that guy was a writer, right? And, he wrote books and stuff. And so that was his jam. But for just general storytelling and seeing how the paths diverge, that's something that I eventually found out that I could do, as Ned said. And there is a lot of work with pre-generated adventures to make them interesting and fun at the table. There are a lot of groups where you could probably do the adventure as is, but the connective tissue from moment to moment doesn't always make sense based on what your players choose to do. They might choose diplomacy in a specific moment, but the adventure demanded that violence must have been had. So if you don't give that to your players, the diplomacy, they'll feel shut down. And then suddenly you're jumping to the next moment where the adventure assumes that violence occurred. And so it's reacting in that way So there's a lot of work that the DM does have to do to make it make sense.
Yeah. The thing that really helps for me is when you are entering into a pre-written campaign, just let go of the idea that you have to run the campaign exactly as written. You can change literally anything and everything you want in that book because you are the one running the campaign.
And I regrettably took me a couple of campaigns to figure that out, actually. Mm-hmm. Even a little bit of ICF, actually. It took me a little bit to figure that out, so which is why this was so revolutionary to me. I ran Rise of the Rune Lords for Pathfinder for Ned, and then I started running Storm King's Thunder, D&D 5e, but before then I also ran Curse of the Crimson Throne for Pathfinder as well. And yeah, it's hard if you're like, nope, I have the book. They obviously must have written it for a reason, so I need to follow every single element to it. That is a hard thing to let go for some people, and I was one of those people.
Yeah, it helps to look at the book as the state of... It's not an exact sequence of events that will happen. You're looking at the state of a world that is full of potentiality, a world in which any number of things could happen. The people who are writing the adventure think that they probably might play out in this way, but they don't know your players. You know your players. And so be willing to live in a world of potentiality.
Yeah, another, anybody who cross-pollinates here and listens to Improv Tabletop, or maybe have done any sort of improv theater from in college or whatever it may be, you could also view it as an ideation. So you can use the pre-generated adventure as an ideation, meaning ideas that you can then pull from to craft and tell a compelling story. Improv Tabletop does this before every mini Fate campaign that they do. They share real-life examples based off of the topic that they're going to be building it on. And then from there, they craft the story where they harken back to some of those moments, or they literally use those moments to then craft and pursue in the campaign. Pre-generated adventure could be viewed as that, as loosely as just, I'm just going to use these as ideas, and I may be pulling them from here to here, from here and here, and I may be cutting them up and shifting them around a little bit. But as Ned stated, the state of the world, I think, is a better way to view pre-generated adventures, being like, this is how things are currently. The moment your players step into the world, the world is automatically being changed. Mm-hmm. They change it just by their mere presence of it.
Yeah, and so we, going into this, had kind of this question of like, what are some things that we have done, some tips that we've used to help us get to the point where we're not looking at a pre-written adventure as the exact gospel, the exact sequence of events that your campaign must follow, and being able to start looking at it as more of that state of the world? Yeah,
because we wanted to help first-time dungeon masters, who are falling into this pitfall of like, I want to use pre-generated, but I don't want to feel like imposter syndrome, or I don't want to feel like I'm have to stick too far to the script, or I want to make it engaging with my players. So yeah, this is a big hurdle, a big thing to encounter for first-time DMs.
Yeah, so I have a few examples of like my first moments encountering kind of this idea in actual play that I want to start sharing with the group. And the first example actually comes from, Thomas mentioned that he ran Rise of the Rune Lords using Pathfinder. The first time I ever experienced this was when I was a player in that campaign. We had one character whose name was Mordecai the Half-Orc, played by our wonderful friend John Kelly. And part of his whole shtick was he was out for vengeance because he had been wronged by the High Order of the Orcs, and he hated them so much that he branded their symbol into his chest. And every time we would meet somebody new, he would just like pull his vest apart and say, "Have you seen this symbol?" And
literal like children, babies, animals that had some sentience. He would say that. And so the player was very dedicated to his trope. And it was wonderful. It brought laughs and also desire and strength from the other players to support him. It was actually really cool.
Yeah. And we were loving this whole shtick, but the entire time I've kind of got in the back of my mind, okay, this is fun, but this is a pre-written adventure. Like, the High Order of the Orcs isn't part of Rise of the Rune Lords. This is never going to go anywhere. But then, surprise, surprise, we're in a dungeon, and we're looking through a bunch of scrolls, and Thomas is like, well, you lift up one of the scrolls and you unfurl it, and what do you see? It's the symbol of the High Order of the Orcs. And all of us at the table were just like, what the heck? This is actually happening? Like, you can do this? Oh my gosh. And we were just like stoked beyond belief that this simple, stupid little thing that John had made important to his character was actually manifesting in the adventure we were playing.
You know, I actually forgot about that moment till you just brought it up. It was such like a little thing that I kind of felt was not really a throwaway moment, but it was like this is kind of cool, like a cool moment to give. And it required a skill check as well. So, I mean, there was like risk and reward still involved in it, but you're right. It did that small of a moment. It took little to no effort on me as the DM to incorporate something as simple as a symbol to then enhance the gameplay for the players, right? But yeah, it didn't have to be, the library was there, the papers were there, and I think they were eventually going to find something of importance there, but just making it the symbol rather than what the adventure said made it really important.
The first example I have of when I decided to integrate something like that into one of my campaigns that I was running, I also was running Storm King's Thunder. Thomas also has run Storm King's Thunder separately. And my friend Evan, who some of you may know from Improv Tabletop, his character was a dwarf, and he was the dishonored son of one of the dwarven kings in Faerun. And I was looking at the map of Storm King's Thunder, this huge swath of land, and I'm like, Citadel Adbar, it's this dwarven citadel kind of way on the opposite side of the map from where they're going to be starting. That's not Citadel Adbar anymore, that's Citadel Elogir, which was his character's family name, and the king isn't just some random king, that's his dad. And that was like the only thing that I changed ahead of time for that entire campaign.
Is this place in the northeast, right above the Honorok Desert? Okay, I know what you're talking about. I actually wanted to go visit there in my campaign, but nobody wanted to.
It's a really fun, and that leads into a huge encounter with the fire giants. And, spoilers for Storm King's Thunder, you can skip ahead a couple minutes if you don't want this spoiled. The king of that citadel has gone missing, and they have to go find him. He's been kidnapped by the fire giants. And so by making that character Evan's dad instead of just some random dwarven king, suddenly there was a lot more weight and gravity. And again, that was the only change I made, was this is your dad, and it added so much extra depth and meaning to the campaign.
Yeah, that was a small thing. The adventure already had written that the king had gone missing, so already could have been a side quest. But that simple change made it a primary quest at that point, right? Mm-hmm. And it didn't take hardly any effort on you as the DM, but just being conscious of like, all right, I'm going to switch this one little thing here. There are a couple examples in Tyranny of Dragons that we did as the ICF cast that we changed a few things. One of the biggest ones, again, we're talking spoilers here, everybody, for ICF and Tyranny of Dragons, but the worm speaker for the White Dragons was never Vandal. Mm-hmm. It was, I don't even remember, honestly. I think it was a dwarf, evil dwarf dude. But when Jacob brought to me the proposition of who Vandal was and their importance, I was like, well, tying Lance's character and motivation to be so integrated in with the Cult of the Dragon, it would make sense if he wants vengeance on Vandal. Let's have Vandal try to rise the ranks of the cult. So he, by nature, has to or wants to pursue this. And so that was a big thing that I consciously made early on. Like, I think before they even got to the Caldera, once we got our sea legs in the campaign and we kind of understood like everybody's motivation, I'm like, all right, Vandal's definitely going to be the White Worm Speaker or a Worm Speaker at this point. Because the adventure had been written to where the previous White Worm Speaker was disavowed because they had lost the mask, actually. And so now so I'm like, oh, if he lost the mask, that means there's a power vacuum at that point. And so that's why I was like, so that just makes sense for a Zentarum agent to rise the ranks and try to fill themselves in with the power vacuum. So that's one example in ICF that we did in Tyranny of Dragons of just making a small tweak to really pull people in. Before we get into some of our other examples, though, because I know we have a lot that we can actually point to in ICF, that practical application, I actually want to scale it back a little bit, because you might be out there, somebody out there might be a first-time DM who's still thinking like, yeah, but that's a full adventure. You had to read the full adventure before you started thinking that you can make some of these decisions. I don't have time to read a 300-page adventure and ingest it before, like, I don't want to have to do that before I start my first campaign. And I totally get that. That's a completely fair point. It can feel daunting that you have to read every single page of the adventure. Now, although reading every single page of an adventure before you start does give you ammo and confidence to start making these changes for your players, it doesn't have to be that case. You don't have to know all of the lore of a place or the world to be able to use it as an ideation. And I think Wizards of the Coast actually did a fantastic job showing us that in, I'll go back to it, the beginner box.
Yeah.
Of Phandalin, the Mines of Phandelver. They did a fantastic job of being like, you've got Faerun, we've got the Sword Coast, but guess what? We're focused on this small, like, 20 by 20 mile grid here, and that's it. And they just talked about the ecosystem of one town and like building from there. And so if Wizards of the Coast was able to do that by shrinking it down to like one town, you surely will be able to do that by only getting a small piece of an adventure.
Yeah. And you can go through and take what you want and disregard whatever you want. Like one example, I do have a tendency to read my adventure books as thoroughly as I can. But in one of the most recent campaigns I just barely started running The Wild Beyond the Witchlight for a couple friends. And there's a whole appendix about role-playing notes for different NPCs that you can meet. Oh, you meet this NPC, these are their bonds and their ideals and their flaws. This is how they talk. This is their personality. And it got to a point where I would like read through the role-playing notes for one character and be like, okay, but I kind of want to play them this way instead. And the next thing I knew, I was doing that for every single NPC. So I was just like, I'm not going to read the role-playing notes anymore. I'm just going to portray them the way that I want to portray them and the way that I think will resonate the most with my players. Yeah.
The last thing I'll say about this to maybe give you an extra boost of confidence here is feeling like you don't have to read through every nitty-gritty bit of details before you start an adventure, because I felt that way when I first became a DM, is just hearkening back to what a lot of people feel is arguably one of the most influential or best DMs on the market right now, Matthew Mercer. He started his home game that is now Critical Role by creating one town. He's like, it's our one shot, it's one town. I'm just creating the ecosystem of one town, and that is it. That just turned out to, we want to go adventuring to another town. Okay, so he started with, then he did another town and another town. And if there's any DM that's able to craft something geared around his players, I think Matthew Mercer is a good example of that. So if he started with one town and very limited information, you can start too and still have an amazing and satisfying campaign as well.
Yeah, and if you're starting in that one small town, maybe you are running Lost Mine of Phandelver, for example, maybe you are running along and you forget a little detail about something that's going on and you realize, oh, I said this when the book says I was supposed to say that. Well, guess what? Your players don't know that. So now the thing that you said is the truth for your campaign. It's easy as that.
And that's your first unintentional but great foray into crafting the adventure to break away from that pre-generated status.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think let's talk some more about examples, maybe some examples that, as you listener have been going through Tyranny of Dragons, some more examples that will help you see the way in which Thomas crafted this story. And something that I think you'll probably notice as a recurring thread is they are probably without exception going to be pretty character driven. It's all about the interests of the characters and the unexpected things that the characters do because of those interests. So we were just talking about, there's this power vacuum with the white worm speaker, the white mask got lost. We were involved in that situation of the white mask getting lost. We killed 2 very important NPCs that we weren't supposed to kill. I think we were pretty open about that in the campaign. So, talk to me about what's the mental process going through Thomas's mind. These guys were supposed to show up later in the campaign, but now they can't. How do we adjust from that?
Yeah, well, to kind of lead into that, I first, I mentioned earlier in this episode that this campaign actually was kind of a transformative experience for me because I felt that I was very rote by the book. I had to do everything in the book, kind of a DM. And it was right around the first Caldera when you went back to revisit it and Mondath and that whole thing, where I started to catch the vision of being a more reactive DM rather than forcing my players to come along this adventure that I was crafting, to react more in a way to where the players were actually contributing and actually driving home points that were interesting to them and not necessarily lined out in the book. Because as we said earlier, once the players come into an adventure, the paths immediately just start to diverge from what the pre-generated adventure says it should do, right? Fast forward to Rezmir and Rath Modar getting destroyed and annihilated at Lottie's place, which Lottie's place didn't exist either, actually, in Tyranny of Dragons. That was a mishmash of another adventure being woven in, but I digress a little bit there. So they weren't supposed to die. They were supposed to be a tease of suspense, climax, intense battle. And I thought to myself, I'm totally going to get them with this battle. I'm totally going to get them with these, with the magic powers that they've got. They're never going to find the chest. They're never going to find the mask, etc., etc. And boy, howdy, did they just surpass all expectations. And it was real exciting, actually, as the DM to see that and to be presented with that choice. But having this mindset of like wanting my players to contribute to the story, it was very easy to let go of my DM pride to be like, well, the adventure's this, and this is what I had crafted, and this is what I had planned. It was very fun and liberating to be able to be like, oh, they killed them? What is going to happen next? I have no idea. And that was a lot of fun, which some people might find paralyzing. But if you're like, if you've already started practicing, like, I'm diverging from the pre-generated adventure, it's just an ideation, it's just the state of the world. Moments like that won't be paralyzing. They will be an opportunity and adventure for you as the DM to make the adventure more fresh, more satisfying, and not stale for you as the dungeon master. Yeah.
And I think that probably kind of led into sort of the year gap that we took. Because if I recall correctly, I haven't actually read this part of the adventure, but I think I remember talking to you about how, like, the year gap that we took, or some of the portions of the adventure that we skipped, one of those bits that we skipped was the part where Rezmir and Rath Modar were supposed to come back.
Yes.
So maybe it's as simple as just being like, okay, they already took care of that narrative thread. Does it really make sense to have them still follow this narrative thread that was laid out beforehand? And this is another thing that's difficult to get over as a DM, is needing to throw away material that you prepared. It's like, I spent so much time and effort getting this ready for my players to go through. I'm just going to throw that all away? Well, I mean, if it's going to make the experience better for the players, then yeah. Yeah.
That can be a hard pill to swallow, being like, but I worked so hard on this. And you're like, yes, you did. You absolutely did. But your players also worked really hard at the table. They contributed quite a bit to get that moment. And if you pull that away from them, they're going to feel cheated. And I think Brennan Lee Mulligan said once, where he was like, I mean, when he was doing his home games, and I think at Dimension 20 even, he was like, I mean, if you don't get to a moment, or if they circumvent something you created, great, put it in a folder. You've done all the work. You've statted everything up. It is a moment that you have now in your back pocket as like a quote unquote random encounter or something you can use later on in the campaign if the moment arises or things like that. So there's not a moment that really needs to be wasted as a DM if you have that mentality as well. So like Brandon Lee Morgan, he's got that mentality of like, my players are contributing the story, and if it circumvents what I have planned, I'm gonna shelf that. I don't need to throw it away because I can always go back and reach that and then retool it, reskin it. Oh, instead of it being a dungeon, it's now a castle because that's where they're at right now. And I can still reuse some of the mechanical stuff and not feel like I wasted my time.
Yeah, but taking that moment to say, that moment to say, not right now, but later, is a good way to honor and respect and reward the ingenuity of your players. You know, the fact that you have to throw away this thing that you prepared or save it for later, as the case may be, is just a sign that you have really good players, and you should probably be happy about that.
Yeah. Amen.
Let's see, another moment that comes to mind, another very character-driven moment, is when we ran into the ice orcs up in the north when we were going to fight Arathator.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. They so the adventure of going to the north, that was taken from Tyranny of Dragons. It was one of the main side quests that the group would be commissioned to do for the Arcane Brotherhood to battle Arathator. But they weren't orcs. Surprise, surprise. They were a roving band of barbarians of varying races, shapes, and sizes. And in fact, they didn't want, they were not genial. They were not kind. They were actually very rude and wanted to murder the adventurers that went up north in the book. But with everything that we had done with Malamara, to give an example of these horrendous orcs being kind, honorable, loyal, was just a fun moment to kind of like give Malamara a choice to see orcs in a different light instead of just reinforcing that fear. It gave her a character choice to, well, do I accept what's in front of me, or do I let my pride fester against orcs? Anyway, but yeah, that was another moment.
Yeah, this is really interesting because it starts out as such a simple change. There's already this band of roving barbarians. They're not just random, now they're orcs. And because of that one change, it sort of starts the snowball moving of, now that we have this one simple change we've made, we have this opportunity to have these social interactions and to have this growth moment for Malamara.
Yeah, that's a good point. You can really start to draw a lot of inspiration as a DM by starting to make some choices like that, simple choices that are changing. And then you just kind of like let the ball roll in your head. Be like, okay, well, we're going to change into orcs. Well, if they're going to be orcs, how's Malamar going to react? Or, she's going to react poorly to them. Oh, what if they're not mean? Because if they are mean, Malamar's just going to attack, and then we're going to get nowhere, right? Because they're not going to get to Arathator because they'll kill Malamara. But what if they're nice? What if they present this? Ooh, now we've got morals. Now we've got decisions. Now we got backstory that I don't even need to bring up. Because Mickey as the player will be forced to confront that as a player at the table, and Ned and Jacob will see opportunities to be like, Malamara, they're pretty nice. They're feeding us, type of a thing. Mm-hmm. Like, have you ever you've told us that orcs are just bloodthirsty monsters, and that's absolutely a good point, Ned.
Now, I think let's start digging into some specific moment-to-moment examples of you reacting to what we as the players are doing. We got quite a few questions specifically about the final battle, some of the things that you altered there. And so this is a good opportunity to go like literally moment-to-moment, Thomas adjusting things on the fly as we are throwing whatever random crazy stuff at him.
Yeah, not only was it a final battle for the campaign, I felt like it was the final battle for my DM techniques and skills in the campaign as well. Yeah, there was a lot of moments that were, if we had screen captured the whole session, you would see me frantically going through books and Googling stuff and being like, guys, I need 60 seconds. Give me a second to think this through. And that was some quite mental gymnastics because, there were a few moments that I had to just react and make decisions on the fly.
Yeah. So I've got my list of questions here. So first question that kind of spurred this entire conversation from Isaac Martinez. How has the story changed over time from what you originally expected at the beginning of the campaign? Big question. There are certainly a lot of moments we won't be able to get to specifically, but hopefully this is at least partially answering your question.
And hopefully we can answer it with the cast a little bit more in our word of recall to some extent as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll definitely have some specific examples of like character moments and whatnot. This one kind of leading up to the battle, this comes from Mikkel. There were a few times in the campaign where the characters just leveled up without much play, including the gift from Bahamut. Was that something to spice up the final battle, or was it written in from the start?
So that's a good one right there. I feel like there's nothing worse than a campaign than feeling like you only got to like level 12 and like you didn't unlock the last few bits of your character, right? Like you work so hard 3 years to get to that moment. But I didn't want to just give it, just like start handing out levels like they're candy. If you recall, I did ask for Fleeple to do a couple religion checks before then. And so that was kind of like me giving myself permission to let the players level up more frequently than they had before by Fleeple having a series of religion checks and then taking like the average of them and being like, okay, on average, I think I could reward this. They're not going to be level 20, but they are going to be this. And Bahamut will be there with his presence and things like that. Which, speaking of reactive DMing, Bahamut physically appearing to them and stop, like doing a time stop. That whole event was improv as well. Actually, I was like, I think Bahamut's gonna pop in, and then we got to that moment, and it just felt like there's moments in improv where you're like, okay, it's gonna do this, and you have an idea of like the path, but it just felt like in that moment, I was like, oh shoot, it feels like Bahamut needs to be here right now, and so I was like, I don't know what he's going to say. I don't know what's going to happen or what we're going to do here. And it was one of those moments where you just start talking. And then as you talk, you're just like, gosh, I hope this sounds good. Yeah. I hope this makes sense to my players. If not, we'll fix it in post. Oh, Mickey says no? Okay, we can't fix it in post.
But hey, it worked out.
But yeah, that was definitely one of the reactive DM moments. And there were quite a few of those moments in the second half of the campaign, especially after the Stonky adventure.
Stonky.
Once we just got our ridiculous, like, just chaos out of the way, and we got right back into the heavy adventure. There were a lot more reactive moments like that where I'm like, I didn't have this planned, but it feels like this should happen. It feels like the Lance and Fleeple should be able to go in Malamar's soul and mind right now.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah, a lot of the reactiveness is really just reading the room. I remember you were telling me when we went into the Stonky arc, you were just kind of like, man, we've been having a lot of really heavy stuff. Wouldn't it be great if we could just goof around and have fun for a little bit?
Yeah.
So yeah, reading the room, seeing just like how are people feeling right now in this exact moment and running with that. One other quick note, I have an example I want to share about leveling people up at an advanced rate. I have run Curse of Strahd twice, and in both instances, I was like, I want the final battle with Strahd to be more epic. Because as written, he just has a regular vampire stat block, and they're like, you might give him this kind of upgraded version with a couple extra features, but he's basically just a stock vampire. And I was like, well, that's lame. I want him to be
that is really lame if he's the main villain.
Yeah. I was like, I want this to be a big friggin' battle that they're going to be able to really sink their teeth into. And like you said, getting to high level is really fun and really satisfying. So the last time I ran, I was like, Strahd, I'm just going to use the stat block for a lich and just not tell them.
Yeah.
And that meant I had to level them up much quicker, and I did have to adjust encounters on the fly more to get to that point. Like, other encounters leading up to the final battle with Strahd had to be beefed up, but that's as long as you're just like following the encounter building chart, making sure you're following the right like CR budget and whatnot, you can do that. And that's like one thing I always say in response to the question of like, man, these DMs feeling like their characters are just too strong and too powerful. I mean, great, because you just get to use stronger and more powerful bad guys to fight against them.
Right. And this could be a whole tangent as well about mechanics and battles, but you really actually do your players a service by starting to throw more harder enemies at them when they start leveling up. If you don't, and then the main bad villain at the very end is like super duper powerful, they're just not prepared at that point because they don't know how their mechanics work, and they don't know the spells that they actually need and that are wasted and things like that. But I won't go into that tangent because I think I could talk about that a lot.
Yeah, we have other questions that we need to get to from our listeners.
Yeah, we got to get to these questions here.
Yeah, now we're getting into the final battle specifically. I think let's start this off with these two questions kind of go hand in hand. One from Isaac Martinez and one from Source 4. Was there ever a possibility of the squad fighting Tiamat herself? And then from Source 4, why the decision to not use Tiamat in the final battle? The book gives options to them if your character does X, Y, or Z to reduce the difficulty, or is that what the weird Severin hybrid was basically?
Yes, great question. So first off, yes, as the second question basically answers, Tiamat coming through the portal was an option. It was always an option for Tiamat to come into the material plane and for the characters to fight them. The book technically had the book made it seem like there was some sort of finality to it, like Tiamat will enter through the portal, but then there were also moments to where it wasn't so final. I'll share the mechanics here because you can go read it up. In order for Tiamat to come through the portal, combat had to last 10 rounds. And
that's a long battle.
At the end of the 10th round, that's when Tiamat was summoned.
Wow.
And in my mind, I was like, how many rounds have we ever gotten through on ICF? Maybe 4 with Arithator or something like that. 5 or 6, maybe. But yeah, 10 full rounds of combat. That just seemed like a lot. And I was like, I want to be true. I want to be honorable. 10 seems like a lot. I could obviously change it to 5. I could change it to 1. I could change it to 3. But here we go back to my mental shift at the beginning of the entire campaign after the Caldera arc. I didn't want to drag my players through an adventure that I wanted to run. I wanted my players to contribute heavily to the story and feel like they were crafting the story. And what had they done up to this point? They had framed Vandal. They had sowed chaos in the camp. They had purposely worked their tail off for a year and a half to try to prevent Tiamat from coming. And it was still a very real possibility that Tiamat was going to come, but I wasn't going to force it if somebody pulled a Fleeple or if there were weird shenanigans that happened. And that was the more reactive. I let myself have, I was like, all right, this is the state of the battle as we go into it. I wasn't going to do the battle as exactly as written if my players changed things. I took the final battle as a state of the world at that moment. Be like, all right, and my players are going to change it as they go on. How is that going to change? How are we going to react to it? And so that's kind of why Tiamat didn't come into play. Had there gone 3 to 5 rounds, yes, Tiamat, that portal would have opened. I think I even hinted that the portal was starting to grow after a few rounds, like hinting that, hey, there's a clock on here. There's some urgency. If I didn't, I meant to, and I'm sorry. But yeah, and then just seeing what happened with our players. To go right into that, though, and to having to react on the fly, I will say literally everything that Ned did as Fleeple basically required me to be like, oh, this isn't in the book. This is not written. Mm-hmm. Okay. I don't know if this made it into the cut for the final episodes, but when Ned was like, I am going to have Star Platinum rip the mask off and just take it off. Because I specifically, as the DM, I told them, if the mask has to be there. The mask is integral to Tiamat coming. And so Ned's like, great, get the mask, save the world, save the cheerleader, save the world, right?
Yeah.
And so that was a huge moment of having to react on the fly. The first moment being like, I'm going to rip the mask off. And I had to go into the book and be like, does it say that the mask cannot be ripped off or that it's magically glued onto Severin? The only thing that it stated was that if Severin dies, but the mask is still on him, it doesn't matter. Like, the incantation and the ritual still will proceed forth. Which Severin actually was getting pretty low on health points, and I was like, we may come to that. But but yeah, that was the first reactive thing, having to make a decision of like, well, do I allow Ned to pursue this idea? Is it going to disrupt the balance too much by just ending the battle right then and there? Hence why I had to make up some few mechanics of like, okay, I can't just give this to you, but let's try to find a compromise to where you can still do what this really cool idea you came up with while still trying to maintain the tension of the moment and the tension of the final battle here.
Yeah, that probably answers Isaac Martinez's question of, did you anticipate the Mask of Dragons being torn from Severin so early?
No, I didn't intend it at all, in fact, to be ripped, period.
Yeah, so kind of the next step after that, this comes from Mikkel, was the exploding portal part written into the battle, or was defeating Severin supposed to be the end?
The exploding portal was not supposed to be part of it. That was also a conscious reactive moment that I had to make as the dungeon master at the very end. Severin transforming into a Tiamat abomination with all 5 of the dragons. That is surprisingly also not in the adventure.
Yeah, definitely not. Batman 72 has a question about that one. Did you have to create a whole new transformation, or was it already provided to use in case, to use, blah, 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 something with the Tyranny of Dragons outline? Yeah, I butchered that question, but you got the idea.
I had to create that. I had to create that from scratch, and that was all reactive. Because you have to honor the decisions that and the cool things that happen. And guess what was granting Severin flight? The dragon mask.
Yeah.
So when the only thing that was providing him flight was a dragon mask, and yet and the other thing was an air elemental that was providing him with flight as well, be grappling him, that suddenly disappears due to lost concentration, gravity's gonna gravity and is going to fall straight down into a portal. It's like, okay, well, a portal into Avernus has to do something.
Yeah.
And so it has to. It can't just be like, oh, I'm fine, I'm good, I fall through it, and that's good. And so I was like, well, here's another moment where I open my mouth and hope something cool comes out. And then it's not just gibbly gobbly garbage that just is being spouted out to the universe at that point.
But once again, it turned out pretty great. I mean, so my emotional roller coaster I went through of like, oh my gosh, he's falling. Oh my gosh, he's hitting the portal. Wait, oh no, this is worse than it was
That's
before.
That's the portal to Tiamat.
Yeah, like it was so well done. And the fact that you were able to just trust your gut and be like, okay, I know my players, I know their arcs, I know kind of what their interests are, broadly speaking. We definitely had the benefit of the fact that we'd had an entire campaign leading up to that point, so you did have that sort of understanding of us intrinsically, but that was what gave you the ability to just open your mouth and let something really cool come out.
Yeah, no, it's... Again, this whole campaign has been a transformative dungeon mastering experience for me, because it really did feel like the summation, like all of our work collectively had paid off as players and the dungeon master, because we had trusted each other, because we had risked unknown moments in the campaign, and because I had let go of these pre-generated moments and tweaked things and just practiced with the players leading up to this moment. It allowed for these really cool moments that would have never been conceived in a million years if I had planned things out and like planned the final battle perfectly and and sort of like led my players through that pre-generated plan that I had created or that the book had created, none of these moments would have happened. It's one reason why Ned and I are so passionate about storytelling and the story structure, and why we hearken back to our improv days so much, not because we love telling dumb jokes and being chaotic, even though those are true. It's because a story crafted by like-minded individuals in the moment, just trying to tell the truth of the moment, is going to be so much more fulfilling, cathartic, and exciting than anything that is pre-generated or pre-scripted. And I think that truly is what brings so many people back to D&D over and over and over, is they get tastes of that. They get a little taste of that in their home game. They get a little taste of that here, a little taste of that there. And then in actual plays, they also get a taste of that. And that is the human element of storytelling that really drives people to tabletop role-playing games.
Yeah.
Dungeons & Dragons just happens to be the biggest one.
Yeah, I think we've got a little bit of time left. I would like to actually ask you about one more moment, and I think this is kind of a good capstone, even a better capstone than the final battle. I want to ask you about the dungeon underneath Candlekeep, because this was the first portion of the campaign, like the first major portion of the campaign that you completely homebrewed from scratch. And this is, I think, my favorite portion of the entire campaign, because there was so much in there that I could tell was specifically for Lance Statelin, and specifically for Malamara, and specifically for Fleeple. So what's, I guess, just kind of keeping it broad, what is sort of the thought process that leads into creating this customized, crafted experience for these three characters?
Yeah, there was a lot that went into that whole dungeon. I'm very happy, very proud of everything that happened in there. I did spend a lot of time crafting and planning a lot of that adventure. And when you craft a dungeon, you do have to. You can't just go fly off the seat of your pants. You do have to build things out. You have to come up with like possible encounters. You have to come up with possible situations. If you, at least this is my opinion, right? Because I did all of that, I was able to then pull from all of those when the moment arrived, or when fascinating things happened and when my players reacted a certain way. I had the ammunition to then pull that stuff out, and all the mechanics were there. All of this was there, et cetera, et cetera. But even in there, side tangent, I think Ruse Desk the Banished was still a reactive moment. I don't think I originally had him in there. Period. I think there was like, there might have been a little bit of like, what do we do? Where do we go? And I was like, it would be really great if they had a guide. And so the next session, I came back with a possibility of Ruse Desk the Banished, and being like, that would be pretty cool.
And I just love the idea of, I'm going to give them a guide who they don't know if they can trust.
Yeah, right? Because the whole thing was eerie. The whole dungeon was just like, oh, what's going on here?
Yeah.
We've got the creepy death hallway. We've got the giant room, and we've got this, which, spoiler, Ruse Desk actually had captured people and brought them down there so he could eventually eat their brains, that you guys never found them. So, anyway.
Nice. Great.
So anyway, that might come out in the Word of Recall, but yeah, that whole moment was just so much fun to be able to try to tie every single moment in there. The great thing about dungeons in Dungeons and Dragons, or traditional like hex crawl games, tabletop role-playing games, is that it might not seem like a lot on paper, but the amount of time when you go from room to room, it really can be an entirely different like landscape and environment. It can be pretty much wherever you want it to be. You can treat it very classical, one D&D or a D&D, where every room has like an enemy and like a mini boss until you get to the end and there's the big boss. Or you can treat it as like, as I treated it, with like, this is the giant room, this is the creepy death hallway, the crypts, and all of this stuff, and just trying to ask the question of like, what will Jacob enjoy the most for Lance here, or what has Lance not been able to experience that this dungeon could experience? For him, it was a connection to his past, this abandoned like necromancy section. It's a library. you're going to have the forbidden section of a library, right? And so just like being able to play with those thoughts was so much fun, to be able to like pull from all sorts of like fantasy that I've loved and like be able to fit my own little like version into them. Fleeple's big drive was going down there to research about dragons. That's the whole reason why they went down there, to discover about these dragon masks, which, by the way, actually in Tyranny of Dragons, dragon masks is what is known knowledge, but I purposely made it not known knowledge
nice.
for the Jank squad, and then that was their opportunity to find out about the dragon masks to help Fleeple get that drive. And then finally Mal, like, oh, this is an opportunity for her to continue to strengthen her bond with her patron if she chooses. And that was just such a fun area to create. I did not create, caveat to beginner DMs or somebody who's wanting to take this on, I did not map out the entire dungeon at once. I did not even draw the dungeon on my own. I used one of the millions of free or very cheap and affordable D&D maps that some wonderful creators give out through Patreon or for free. And I just said, this looks like a really cool map for a library. And then I said, oh, here's a babbling brook. Why would there be a babbling brook in an underground library? Ooh, I've got a good idea for that. Boom. And I used that as my ideation, my quote-unquote state of the world, state of the room, state of the dungeon. And there were things on that map that I didn't like, so I just never showed it to my players. I'm like, this doesn't exist. It doesn't exist at all. Because it just didn't make sense mechanically, right? But just that exploration and trying to discover the dungeon and how specifically it interacted and would pull each of the members of the Jinx squad in was so much fun. I love the soul gems. The soul gems was one of my favorite moments to get past into the necromancy room. That was one of the favorites.
Yeah, that's another good point, is having a map is a great way to do some location-based storytelling, I guess. Myself, like if you are an Improv Tabletop patron and you're listening to our Miceborn campaign, then you'll see an upcoming dungeon. I just took a map from Ghost of Saltmarsh, an adventure that I ran previously, for this wrecked ship, and I just said, I'm going to forget everything I know about this adventure from the first time I ran it, and I'm going to try and arrange these rooms so that they tell a story as they get further and further down into the ship. And we saw that so well as we started going down into this dungeon beneath Candlekeep. There's the creepy death hallway that is, which we didn't realize at the time, but I realize now in retrospect, the creepy death hallway, that's the Lance section of the library. And we keep going down the dragon room where we meet Mud, that's the Fleeple section of the library.
Yep.
The Demonomicon room, that's the Mal section of the library.
And then you had neutral areas. You had neutral areas for everybody to still possibly interact, but having a purpose to each one of the rooms of like, there's a possible encounter here. There's a possible benefit here. The giant room, there's a possible benefit there, but they didn't know that. So there was a little bit of risk, you know, and that's kind of the theme about dungeons. But I really liked what you said, location-based storytelling. And you might ask yourself, well, I come up with some pretty fun and engaging locations. And you know what? You do. As a dungeon master, you know your strengths and weaknesses, and that is something that you could be really good at. But what I will tell you is when you force yourself to look at a map that somebody else created, it then pushes you as a dungeon master to consider possible things and get out of your comfort zone to then make yourself a fully well-rounded dungeon master to be like, consider things that you wouldn't automatically default to. I don't think I would have naturally defaulted to a to a creepy death hallway, honestly.
Yeah.
I like giants, I like dragons, and it made sense for the Demonomicon, specifically for Mal. But having all of those crypts, I'm like, there's crypts in this library? Oh, okay. Because horror's not really my jam. But it forced me to consider like, okay, what about horror? Like, how could I make this work? And that was a big strength to lend itself to location-based storytelling.
And it's a good opportunity to get yourself into the mind of your player as well. Because if you look at a room and you think, what's this on this table over here? Your players are probably going to have the same question. So that's a good opportunity for you to be like, okay, well, what can I put on this table that is going to be interesting for my players?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's been very apparent for the past 10, 15 minutes where I've just rambled on about this dungeon, how much fun it was. It took a lot of time leading up to it, and thankfully I had a lot of time to prepare, but it was so satisfying how it turned out, and how everybody was able to react to it. So I highly recommend it if you're feeling like, I want to do my first foray into homebrew. And that's really all I've done. I've done that and like little moments over the entirety of ICF. But that was my big like mechanics, other than like Mondath's transformation and like, like the dragon teeth, which that was a possible side quest that you guys could have followed, but never did. And I was like, great, that's not what they want. That's cool. So I'm not going to force that type of thing. But yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff there, and but give yourself as many resources and aids to help you if this is your first foray into homebrewing something as big as like a mechanical dungeon.
Yeah, you don't have to you don't have to shoulder the entire burden of creation when you're running an adventure for your players. And I would maybe even encourage you not to try and shoulder the entire burden, because you're going to maybe get burnt out. You will experience that myself.
Yeah, you'll get burned out so quickly. And it's not an imposter syndrome. You're not cheating by doing that. It really is just being like, hey, this is where I'm at. I'm at level 1 with dungeon mastering. I'm going to keep getting better by using the resources that people give to me. Sometimes I'm going to copy things, but then you'll start to realize that you will continue to level up as you borrow things or as you use them as inspiration. And then eventually you'll be like, oh my gosh, somehow I'm like a level 8 dungeon master or whatever. And you'll realize that you'll start having those creative thoughts on your own, or making them your own as well before you even realize it. But you don't have to beat yourself up by borrowing or using other people's material.
Yeah. Wow. We've been talking for a while, haven't we?
Oh boy. Oh, can you tell that we are passionate?
Man, well, dang it, we probably should cut ourselves off at this point. But
we probably should.
I mean, listeners, well, we obviously have more stuff we want to talk about. If you have questions, please send them our way, because Thomas and I love to just geek out about this stuff.
Yeah, and not even questions. If you have like mechanical things that you want to like maybe workshop, I've been thinking about like mechanics are something that I would really like to get better at as a dungeon master. Just being able to craft things that don't totally break D&D 5e or Pathfinder if I ever jump back to Pathfinder and things like that. And so if you ever have like, hey, I've got this magic item, or hey, I've got this NPC for like an 8th level character, like, what do you think? I think sending an email in and maybe doing like one of those as a dungeon master, a Commune with Dungeon Master might be a good idea for us as well. This is me literally brainstorming with Ned right now. So
yeah.
So Ned's like, oh, this wasn't on the script. Okay.
Surprise, we're reactive DMing.
Reactive DMing here. Yeah, so feel free to shoot that stuff into us as well. I can't guarantee that we're going to get to it fast. I mean, we've got season 2 coming out, and a whole host of other things that we're thinking about toying around with. So, but we'd love to see it just in general. I mean, Michael Sear, shout out to you for sending all those magic items out to me forever ago. That took me forever to look at, but we finally did. So, I mean, we love that stuff. I love that stuff.
Man, well, everybody, thanks for listening to this nice, long, meaty episode.
Hopefully we'll get you through the next month to the Word of Recall next month if you are waiting for that too.
Something that I can guarantee will be an even meatier episode based on the amount of questions we've gotten.
Oh my gosh, we've gotten a lot, but we would still like you to send yours in. Don't feel like, oh, they have so much, they're not going to answer mine. Like, you know what? Send it in. Just send it. And, you know, if we get 300 questions, we won't be able to answer all of them, but we will find a way to somehow answer them or tangentially get the answer out to you.
So, I guess with that in mind, a month-ish, the first Wednesday of April is when that will be coming out. So keep your eyes on your podcatcher for that episode.
Yeah, but as always, you can reach out to us or email icastfireball2020@gmail.com. We have our Discord that you can join by going onto our Patreon at our $5 tier. That's only $5 a month to get onto that Patreon, and you can talk to us, other fans, and we have like a DM corner over there, which I think I'm gonna now loop Ned into now that we're done with season 1. But yeah, it's just a ton of fun. You can we chat on it daily with a lot of fans and with each other. So go shoot your questions on over there. But if you want to hear more awesome dungeon mastering stuff and some of this reactive DMing and storytelling, go look at Improv Tabletop. They have some long form campaigns. They have short form campaigns. They have Patreon exclusive campaigns. It's a lot of fun. Lastly, don't forget to like, subscribe, share with your friends and fellow wacky adventurers. But until next time, I'm Thomas.
And I'm Ned.
Let's keep that fire going, everybody. We'll see you all next time.
Bye now.
For some reason, I was going to say shalom, and I had to stop myself, and I was like, let's keep that fire going.
Yeah.